Hello and welcome to a very special roundtable discussion here at Sultan Light Television to discuss one of the big crises taking place in the world today, a crisis of world hunger and famine, particularly in Yemen, Somalia, northeast Nigeria, and South Sudan. And with me are four colleagues and friends, each of us trying to respond to this crisis in a different way. So welcome, Marie-Claude, welcome, Luke, Bishop Crosby, and Jenny. But let's tell our audience who you are and what is your interest in this very important topic. Tell me, Marie-Claude.
Well, my name is Marie-Claude Lalonde, and I'm the National Director for Aid to the Church in Need. We are an international charity working in more than 140 countries. And of course, we are present in South Sudan, northeast Nigeria, where we have programs for this famine.
Luke.
Yes, I'm Luke Stocking, and I'm representing Development and Peace Caritas Canada. And for those that don't know, Development and Peace is celebrating its Jubilee year. 50 years ago, the Canadian Conference of Catholic Bishops founded Development and Peace to be an international development agency to assist our brothers and sisters throughout the global South, Africa, Asia, Latin America, and the Middle East. And the countries we're talking about today, we are no stranger to the needs there, and we have been working there for many years. And so as this crisis has hit, we are working there in a very special way right now. And so we're very grateful for the generosity that's been shown, and hopefully some people today who have shown that generosity will hear a bit more about how their generosity is making a difference.
Thanks. Jenny.
So I'm Jenny Cafiso, and I'm the Director of Canadian Jesuits International, which is an office and initiative of the Jesuits in English Canada. It's been around for 60 years. It started as the mission office of the Jesuits in English Canada, but now it's called Canadian Jesuits International. We support projects in different parts of the world. And even though we're quite small, we rely on the network of Jesuits around the world, and therefore, thanks to the presence of the province in Eastern Africa, we're also able to work in those areas and the countries affected by the famine today.
Bishop Doug, no stranger here. Welcome back. Tell us why you're here. Let our audience know what and who you represent.
Thank you very much. I'm the president of the Canadian Conference of Catholic Bishops. I'm also the Bishop of Hamilton. Maybe I should say I'm the Bishop of Hamilton first, and then for the next few weeks, the Bishop President of the Canadian Conference of Catholic Bishops. And when we heard about this crisis, really the United Nations suggested it's probably the greatest humanitarian crisis since the Second World War. So, I mean, it's that significant. And it's not something that we've heard about. We haven't heard a lot about it on the news and in our Canadian media. So we were asked to be part of to make the conference involved, to get involved, and to have the bishops be involved, and to get the Catholic community involved. And that's exactly what we did a few months ago.
Many will say that we have so many issues at home to take care of. We have issues of hunger, of homelessness, of unemployment, all kinds of crises afflicting families. We have a refugee crisis that's arrived at our doors now. So why is it important that our agencies, that your agencies, also take us to look at the worldwide crises? Shouldn't we be concerned with our own first?
Well, I think for us as Catholics, we start with Matthew 25, when did I see you hungry? When did I see you homeless? And it didn't say you gave me food and you gave me something to drink if I was your neighbor or if I lived in your same country. It's wherever I am. And the need, our brother and sister, is anywhere in the world. We respond with humanity. The other thing is that for us, the humanitarian imperative applies, for us starts with Matthew 25, but applies to all human beings. And it applies to all, whether we are secular organizations, religious organizations of any faith. And the humanitarian imperative says that we are there to, whenever there's a crisis and suffering, we're there to prevent it or to respond to it. And it's an imperative that applies to all human beings and to all, whether it's UN, NGO, and other agencies. And that's why we respond. And that does not mean that we look after international crisis, not the national. We all do what we can, and there are agencies that look after Canadian issues and others that specialize more in the international, but we're all there to respond to our brothers and sisters. And I think lastly, if we look at the example of Pope Francis, who speaks about looking after our common home, and the home does not have an address, the address is the world, and that's what we're being called to do.
And I would build on that even to say it's inherent in our very identity as Catholics, the word Catholic meaning universal, and our recognition that each and every one of us that share this planet, this common home, you know, is equally a child of God. And so as Catholics, we look to the whole of the human family to see who are the most vulnerable, you know, who are the ones who are suffering the most, and that means going beyond our own borders and looking at the whole human family.
Marie-Claude, Aid to the Church in Need has been an agency that's really raised our awareness in so many things. The programs that we air on our network are so much appreciated by our audience. How does your agency, known especially for the work in Eastern Europe, the fall of communism, life behind what was the Iron Curtain, how does your agency get involved in this famine crisis right now?
Well, actually, we are mainly a pastoral charity, and we have partners with whom we work all year long. But when something like that happens, of course, our partners, they take the phone, send an email saying we have needs that may not be pastoral, but we need help from you. And that's how we stepped in actually to work with the problems with the famine in Africa, because you cannot say to your partners, this is not pastoral, go home. No, we're brothers and sisters, and we said we're universal brothers and sisters, and I think we connect through our humanity. And for these reasons, we can never say no to needs like that.
Bishop Crosby, on a local level of Hamilton and on the national level, you get to see the Church's response to many of these crises. What is unique about the Catholic response to this humanitarian crisis of worldwide hunger and famine?
Well, I think it's certainly there was a lot of enthusiasm when they want to respond. When they hear, and I'll tell you, I think it started for us when Pope Francis put the light on it. He always, he has a high level view, and so when he focuses on something, we become aware of it. And I think so Catholics, when they hear him speaking about it, want to do something. And so at Hamilton, I remember getting letters. You get all kinds of letters all the time, but getting letters from a parishioner saying, when are we going to do something? When is this going to happen? And so there's a sense of urgency, a desire to be involved, and we have Development and Peace. We have these organizations that are, that are good intermediaries for us. So we have a way to help. And these are the people who make it happen.
You know, we're living in a time now of tremendous divisions caused by politics, divisions in different countries, divisions in our country, divisions in the Church. What does a joint response like ours say in the midst of this crisis? Why is it important that we respond together as Catholic Christians to this? Shouldn't we could say your agency or D&P is responsible, and Jesuits, you can handle the refugee crisis, and let the bishops do something. But what is a common response to this say to the world?
Well, I think it's a question also of showing the example. These countries affected by famine actually are affected by famine because of divisions, because of war. So I think it's our own duty to work together and to be able to show the example. And also I would add that if you work on your own, sometimes you have the impression that the problems are so big that you won't make a difference. But when I see what other agencies do, I say, well, you know, we might be able to make a difference, and it's worth taking the chance.
I think I agree that in the doing itself, it's a sign of working together, of the possibility of working together. So it's not only what we do, but it's the how we do it that is a sign. The other reason is also that we're more effective. Anybody who's worked in a humanitarian crisis, anybody who's worked in the field sees that we have to work together, and not just as Christians, not just as Catholics, not just as interfaith organizations, but we have to work with secular organizations, we have to work with the UN, we have to work with the government. If you are in a refugee camp with 500,000 people, no agency can do it all. Yeah. You have to work together. And it's only if you work together that you're most effective. And thirdly, I think I would also like to say that we're taking our cues from the people in the field. The appeal that came from Sudan came from the Bishops' Conference, who spoke on behalf of an appeal that came from the South Sudan Council of Churches. And so they're working together, and they're working not only at responding at an emergency, but they're also working at the level of advocacy. And their peace plan that they have proposed comes from the Council of Churches. So these are a number of churches that are working together to respond to a particular problem, because only by working together we have a hope of achieving something.
Jenny mentioned South Sudan, and I know you and I both know that South Sudan is probably the newest country to join this world of nations. Why is it so important that development and peace be concerned and be assisting this newest country?
Well, anytime a people express their right to self-determination, to come to be liberated, to form, we so often throughout history, it is through bloodshed, through violence, things happen. So, but we believe it is possible for that to happen now. Without that, we need to support all the efforts we can. When a new country is being born in conditions of adversity and all the challenges that come with it, for to be able to express as much support as possible and to be there. And South Sudan, in particular, our response to South Sudan struck me deeply, actually, because of the here we speak of the sanctuary of our churches, right? We call it the sanctuary. And the origin of, I guess, the word sanctuary is a holy place, but it also came to be known as sanctuary, as a place where people could be protected, right?
And flee and
protected. And in South Sudan, 1,000 families were given literal sanctuary in the churches through the work that we're supporting there, through Caritas, where families were able to literally live in churches and be protected, receive literal sanctuary, over 1,000 families in the context of the crisis that's unfolding there.
Bishop Crosby, as bishop, you've worked or you've connected at different moments with each of these agencies. You've had a relationship institutionally, individually. What have you learned about these agencies and their response to this particular crisis?
A few years ago, we worked with Development and Peace in Kanewa.
That's the Catholic Near East Welfare Association,
that's
another
right.
Wonderful agency.
And to work on supporting the whole horrible situation in the Middle East, Syria, and it was very successful. Catholics are generous. They are very generous, and they're very generous to these organizations. And the wonderful thing about it is something like this features these organizations. I mean, fewer might be aware of the Jesuit mission group, but now it's been highlighted. And of course, Aid to the Church in Need has been going for a long, long time, and Development and Peace is in a sense a favored child. So these organizations are, I think we consider them ours. This is the way we reach out, and I think it's proved again that Catholics want to be part of this. And as you say, not only Catholics, because others joined in to help us in this whole effort beyond the Christian community.
Jenny, a point that you raised struck a chord with me, that when we're on the ground working in these different crises, in the midst of these, we have to inevitably interact with governments, with governmental policies. We can't do it alone, as Bishop Crosby said. There's all of our efforts together. But nevertheless, we bring to these crises Catholic lenses, a Catholic perspective, a rich tradition. What happens in the midst of such situations when we encounter some profound differences with government policies or other agencies who have different goals than we do? How are we to respond to those situations?
Yeah, I think as Catholics, we live and work in the world, but we are who we are, but in interaction with the others. I think Catholic agencies do what they do best, and we have advantages that others don't have. One is the capillary presence in many of these countries. Probably all of us have visited places where you can visit only by traveling in a small plane and then a small boat and then a lorry, and you find a little clinic with two sisters serving the population, and they have been there for the long haul. And that is, it might be a small presence, but it's a long-standing presence. And that's, for example, one of the reasons we can reach right now, one of the ways we're working in these areas in South Sudan and in northern Kenya is because, for example, a group of sisters have a network of clinics in areas where others are not. So it's that once I was told in a refugee camp in northern Kenya by the UN representative, he said to me, you know, I really envy your team here because the people consider them their friends and they don't consider me their friend. And it's because the sisters had been there for a long time and they knew people and they invited them to their homes. At the same time, the sisters could not have run their camps without the UN being there. And each agency, and the Red Cross was there, and the World Vision was there, and FAO was there, and the UNICEF, and all the various organizations with their various specialty. But the Jesuit Refugee Service team, in that case, had a presence and an ability to respond that others did not, and they stood by it, and that's what we do.
Bishop Crosby, though our theme today, our topic is clearly the world famine, the crisis of famine and hunger, I don't think we can talk about this without some kind of reference or mention to your recent response to the Canadian government's decision to allocate a large part of a $600 million sum to women's reproductive rights, abortion, contraception. Though there were 6 categories of that large amount of money, one of them, nevertheless, is significant because it touches upon things that we as Catholics are diametrically opposed to. We do not approve, we do not allow in any way. Explain to me your response to that Canadian government decision and what we can learn from your response, and what do we do when we're in a similar situation, though it's famine and hunger, that we have great difficulty with governmental decisions and choices?
Well, I can say that, let's start this way. You know, I said earlier, Catholics are generous. I think you could probably make that larger. Canadians are generous. Mm-hmm. Canadians make a contribution around the world, very important contribution around the world, to the well-being of world citizens. Mm-hmm. And the comment I referenced in the letter to the foreign minister was particularly that, you know, this huge amount of money was made available here. And in this humanitarian crisis, the largest humanitarian crisis since World War II, according to the UN, 1/6 was given, and more could have been, should have been done. I think could have been done, and especially on the part of the government, because this is a crisis of hunger. These are even fundamental survival, life, and. Now, we protested the other because also on the grounds of, you know, making abortion a core Canadian value. Well, You know, we would never accept that. But in this particular, in reference to what we're talking about today, it was just the difference in contribution. I think Canadians would want to and could do more. And that was the reference in the letter.
Luke, Development and Peace always has a prophetic and critical stance. Is the Canadian government doing enough for this world famine crisis?
No. No, I mean, of course, you always acknowledge where, the actions, positive actions that a government does take, and there are positive actions that, we're grateful. Would we have raised as much money as we raised in this appeal? 3.8 million if you include the matching fund. If they hadn't announced the matching fund, probably not. So that's a good thing, but there's certainly more that can be done. And I think also we're going to be focusing on peace building in the fall, an education campaign on building peace. And what happens in a crisis like this is unfortunately an opportunity often gets missed to look at what are the root causes of what is happening here. Unfortunately, I was saying this is somewhat unique in that it's an appeal where we have 4 different countries, all with very different contexts, but the same thing, war and drought, and making the links between drought and climate change in the region as well too. It's 4 this time. It's going to be, maybe it'll be 8 countries the next time. Because if we're not addressing the root causes, and that's where there's an opportunity, and our government could do more as well too, to be using that opportunity to provide not only help for the immediate term, the helping people, 400,000 people with cholera in Yemen, helping in that immediate moment, but also making the commitment to, looking at its commitments in terms of helping our brothers and sisters in the long term as well too, and in the particular context of that region of the world. So there's always more that can be done.
All right, Claude, the name of your very agency, Aid to the Church in Need, and you've done tremendous things for Christians and Catholics and minority. But we know if you look at these countries affected, South Sudan, Yemen, Somalia, Northeast Nigeria, we're dealing with many Muslims.
Yes.
How does your agency, that has a rich tradition of supporting the church and Christians, how do you respond to this situation? How do we respond to this? Because we're also working in the refugee crisis as well. We're dealing with huge amounts of Muslims as well as Christians. How do you deal with it?
I would simply answer, we respond in terms that if someone knocks at the door, a stomach doesn't have a religion. If someone is hungry, we will feed that person. And sometimes we're criticized for doing it, but nevertheless, we will keep on doing it. It's very important, I think, as Christians, to show our universality, and it means also helping our neighbors who are not Christians or even Catholics. So we do help. We help in camps where there are no Christians. In certain places, and we will never stop doing that. It's so important, and as I said before, I think we have a role to play in showing the example, and this is one great example we can show to everyone working with us and being generous with our organizations.
I would say also once again that we need to take our cues from the people on the ground. And if we look at, for example, in Syria, the Jesuit refugee service in Aleppo, there's a team with 1 Jesuit. The vast majority of the staff are Muslims, and every night they prepare 8,000 meals for whoever needs, and they all risk their lives because they have to cross an area that they have to look to make sure that there is no bombs coming down, and they risk their lives whether they're Christians or Muslims, and they serve people according to need. I think this is who we are, and the same goes as most of the refugees are Muslims, people in many of the countries we're talking about, but even around the world, the vast majority, and we're there to respond as the need is, and the people on the ground teach us the lessons.
Bishop Crosby, you've been a real leader in terms of ecumenical and interfaith relations in this country. You've set an example for us. How can the Roman Catholic Church in Canada, the Bishops' Conference, the Canadian Conference of Bishops, the Diocese of Hamilton, how do we respond to a crisis in which so many Muslims are deeply affected?
It's life and death, and they're human beings, and so you must reach out. You can't walk away, you can't see it and turn your back. But I think we should also acknowledge that the Muslim community, or various Muslim communities, were also very involved in this particular project, and which is an exciting thing, really. That it's bigger than us, because the whole issue is bigger than us, and so the more people who are aware and become involved, the more difference you can make, as was said earlier. You know, it's something I don't know, learned some years ago in another instance, but it isn't just the big donations, the big contributions, but it's the many little contributions that can make such a significant difference in this kind of effort.
And I would add to that. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead. No.
I would just add to that. You know, you asked earlier what is unique about the Catholic response, and just building on what you just said. You know, I sitting in the pew on Sunday when the announcement is made. You know, we're taking up a collection, and you know, the people sitting beside me in the pews, they don't need to see the report to see, you know, exactly what they just know, by virtue of their faith and the community that they're part of, that there is a need being expressed and they're being asked to respond, and they respond. And that's really beautiful in terms of the uniqueness of the Catholic response, that we are generous, that it is in us to give, and that we do so so willingly, and you know, and I guess as a charitable organization that's used to, like, show me the pie chart, show me where all the money is going, you know, when you have people just responding because they trust you, I think there's something about that that's unique about the Catholic response, that all those little donors that you were talking about, you know, those people giving those little amounts, there's an element of faith and trust in what they are giving. And that's why we're also grateful to Salt and Light to be able to highlight this and give them a little bit of, you know, of background on what is actually happening, because while that faith is appreciated, it is also good for the people to hear, you know, where their generosity is going.
And on that note, our time is up, but perhaps what we've heard today is a truly Catholic Christian response. And Marie-Claude's line will stick with me, that a hungry stomach doesn't have a religion. When I was hungry, you gave me to eat. When I was thirsty, you gave me to drink. When I was homeless, you made a place for me. When I was all alone, you visited me. And what we've heard today from 4 outstanding agencies and instruments in the Church: Aid to the Church in Need, Development and Peace, Jesuit Refugee Services and Jesuits International, and the Roman Catholic Diocese of Hamilton and the Canadian Conference of Catholic Bishops, is we are in this together. And we cooperate with our Christian brothers and sisters, we cooperate with governments, we cooperate with religions, the great religions of the world that are deeply concerned with those who are hungry and thirsty and suffering. And there's only one response, and that is to do something about it. On behalf of Salt and Light Television, I'm Father Tom Rosica. Thank you for joining us for this very special roundtable discussion addressing the world famine, the crisis of world famine and hunger that's sweeping many countries of the world, particularly Sudan, Yemen, South Sudan, Yemen, Somalia, and northeast Nigeria. Thank you, and please respond generously.